Hello, I'm Tara All. We're going to talk about planets on the first today. This is actually a topic that probably would take a lot more time than 40 minutes, so we will get as far into it as we can. And I first want to share, this is something that I have two main teachers in astrology. Laura Nalbandian was my EA teacher, and then Adam Gainsberg. And so Adam had encouraged me to look into putting planets on the first as a new way to experience myself. And for the past year and 2 months, I've been trying this out, and it's been phenomenal as far as what I've been learning about me and in my own evolution. So what I'm really going to share here is a lot of my experience, and it's still stuff I'm testing out. So I just want to encourage everyone to play around with it, and perhaps we can share what we come up with and find if this is something you have not used before. So you can go on to the next one, Linda. Next, yeah, perfect. So what is a planet on the first? I want to emphasize that it's an artificial chart. So we pick whichever planet we want to make first, and then we rotate essentially the zodiac so that that planet sits on the ascendant. But that geophysical moment has never occurred. So it's important to keep in mind that it's a choice we make. It's like shifting within ourselves, but it's not a real chart of a real point in time and place. It's a conscious choice to experience life through a new filter or facet of ourselves. So it's not something that's outside of us. I think of it this way, that if our whole beingness is like a big house or a big mansion, and we've always stayed in one room facing one corner, that doesn't mean that all the other rooms and levels and grounds were not part of us. It's just that we didn't turn around or step outside to experience them. So for me, choosing a different planet first is like that. It's within myself shifting to a different place. And it's weird because it's a conscious choice to subconsciously experience something new. And I don't know if I have perfect words for that, but if you try this out yourself, I think you'll get a feel for it. So again, it's a new perspective, a new view, a new lens. It's not a new part of you. It's already within you. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is just real briefly for you to see what the chart looks like if you haven't looked at a planet on the first chart before. In SolarFire, when you go to edit a chart and choose the house system, that's where you can choose a planet first. I'm not sure where it is at in other programs, but you can see on the left side, that's my natal chart. And when I chose Venus first, which is what I did my birthday in 2015 and again my birthday in 2016, you can see that then Venus moves right onto the ascendant. So we can go on to the next slide. This one is just to let you see what it looks like. So I want to talk about some kind of background basics, just so we're on the same page. So when we talk about choosing planets first, we have a better understanding of what that might mean. So what are planets in general? To me, they each represent a facet of our psyche. And I do believe that every facet is in every other facet. For example, every planet is in every other planet. And this is not the time for that long discussion, but the point is that everything operates all at once, but we as humans with our human mind, we need to break things down into pieces or parts so we can better understand it. So for me, that's what the planets represent. How do we take a whole psyche or a whole self and then break that into parts we can look at? Perfect. So what's the ascendant? Well, the AC is the I, or the primal and instinctual self-image that we create for ourselves. And then that self-image is defended by our ego, which is represented by the moon. So the ascendant is whom we are to realize ourselves as. We think about the 12th house as being part of everything. The first house is where we come into being a thing. So that sign or planets on the ascendant in the first house speak to how we are trying to individuate as a distinct thing. And specifically, not just distinct from everything around us, but different from who we've known ourselves to be in the past. So with this perspective, everything is instinctually filtered or experienced through the sign and planets on the AC, but we're not aware of this. So I think of our rising sign oftentimes as the subconscious questions that we ask ourselves all the time, but we're not aware that we're doing it. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so here's an example of some rising sign instinctual questions. And I'm sure you can all come up with a lot more, but this helps us get a quick peek at it. So if I'm Aries rising, a question that's always coming up subconsciously for me is, can I do it? And so my behavior is going to respond to that subconscious question by trying to prove that I can do things, even if I don't realize that that's why I'm doing it. And so this is true for all the different signs. They have different instinctual questions. Okay, let's move on. So when it comes to the natal rising with planets on the first, I think it's important that we think about this in the sense that planets on the first is really focusing on planet function. So even though when we rotate the chart to put that planet on the first, it will show the new rising sign as being the same sign as the planet. In my mind, I always hold the natal rising, and I just, in a sense, marry it with the planet sitting there. So that's the one part that when we're looking at the planets on the first chart, even though, for example, in mine, I have natal Aries rising. So when we move Cancer, Venus to the ascendant, it shows that my ascendant is Cancer. I just ignore that and say, I know I'm Aries rising, but now I've got Venus living right on that AC with it. And one good way to think about how this energy works is if you know someone or if you have a natal planet on the AC, that will give you a feel for how that energy works. Okay, so how do planets on the first behave? They are an experiential lens or filter. So we are choosing to experience life through a particular facet of our psyche. We're choosing to see, feel, and approach life through the part of us represented by that planet. I think a better question is, how do I behave if I choose to experience life through the Mars part of me, or the Moon part of me, or the Venus part of me? And so this rising, or the I, as I was saying before, is now wedded with that planet, and everything is instinctually filtered and experienced through the planet. So if I, like I have, chosen Venus first, how does the Venus part of me see, think, and feel? How does the Venus part, what questions does that Venus ask instinctually without me thinking about it? How does the Venus part of me experience and respond to other parts of me? And you can see how with me, because Mars rules my chart natally, choosing Venus first was a very different instinctual experience to have. So from a counseling therapeutic use, this is something that I've just now started to test out with my clients. So I've suggested to them to start doing this, but I haven't collected data back yet to see how it's working for people. So it's still kind of out there for me. But I feel like, in my own experience, it helps to strengthen and develop atrophied facets of our psyche. It really helps us build up muscles, the parts of ourselves that we don't naturally gravitate towards, or if we like to choose a different lens all the time, this really helps us be in a different space within ourselves. It gives us a focal point and specifics to work with, which is awesome with a client. I mean, you can spend hours just talking about Mars. And if that's really up for somebody, this is a real tool for how they can go forward and then, make that first, choose that part of themselves. And then for me also, I see a lot of potential for increasing alignment between parts of ourselves. So for example, the inner private self with the instinctual projected self is just one example. All right, so what do we choose for a planet on the first? I'm still playing around with it. I look at planets square the nodes because I feel like if there's something we need to reclaim and reintegrate, that this is a great way, a great tool to, or a method for helping us get to that place. The ruler of the north node, because if our path of Dharma indicates a certain way with a certain planet function, that's an awesome thing to choose. Retrograde planets, planets on angles, planets at 0 degrees. I think planets on 0 degrees, partially because that's so new. So embodying that energy, really choosing it first can help. My Venus is at 0 degrees, so I'm finding that to be true for me. And then also other ideas, I think I'm hoping people will share after this, maybe what works for them, because I'm still playing around. But I think this gives us a good idea. And we know with our EA model, we can very easily see, you could look at, Pluto polarity points, you can look at all kinds of north node, you can look at particular aspects. You can use solar returns and progressions and transits to see what's up right now, and that can help you choose. So we won't go through these in too much detail, but I just want to give you an idea. The idea with planets first is they're a focalizing crystal, parts within ourselves. So this is an example for each of the planets if we were to choose them, or including the luminaries as well. What types of questions would be going on under the surface? So if we were to choose the sun, our outer radiance, there's things like, is it bright enough? Can I shine here? Am I seen? The moon, then that's focusing really our inner stability. So then it's more things like, is it familiar? Do I know it? Is it satisfying? Is it sensitive enough? Do I feel okay? Mercury, then we're really wanting to know, can I track it? Is it classifiable? Am I getting somewhere with it? Can I work out the problem? And then if we go on to the next slide with, should be Venus next. Yes, is it yummy? Is it icky? Is it harmonious? Does it feel good? Am I comfortable? Is it embodied enough, receptive enough? Venus has a lot to do with our physicality. So this embodiment piece is big here. Mars, do I want it? Can I get it? Does it turn me on? Is it powerful enough? Is there energy in it? If we go to the next with Jupiter, is it exciting enough? Is it insightful enough? Big enough? Rich enough? Does my intuition say yes? Will I have freedom? Saturn, does it have legs? Is it stable? Can I count on it? Is it safe? Is someone in charge? Will it last? Uranus, is it new enough, liberal enough, interesting enough, radical enough? Is it outside the box? And Neptune, we get things like dreamy enough, compassionate enough, fantastical enough. Is it conscious altering enough? I do want to make one comment, and it's not in the slides. I feel that we can use this with any of the planets, but as always, the inner planets are more personal to us. And so I think that we can more tangibly work with it in that sense. And that's not a discouragement on using the outers. I just think that starting with the innards is a innards is a good place to start. So then aspects come into play. And if we take the function of the psyche that we've chosen, represented by the planet on the first, that's now going to determine how planets and aspect are experienced. So in other words, the aspects stay the same because the relationships between things when we make this planet on the first chart don't change. The houses they land in do, but the relationships don't. The relationships are seen through the glasses of the planet on the first. So in other words, if Venus is on the first and Pluto is in the fourth, square Venus, the experience from the Venus standpoint would emphasize fear and cellular resistance to ancestral or genetic memory. It's just one example. All right, so let's go to Venus land. This slide, I kid you not, as I chose Venus, we were on a road trip. We literally drove through the city of Venus. I had so many things happen when I chose Venus that it's been sometimes delightful and sometimes quite uncomfortable. But let's take a look at the next slide here, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on my chart. I want to spend more on Olive's chart, but I want you to see how I use this, because earlier on I talked about how it's a conscious choice to have a subconscious experience. That's a weird thing to play around with. It requires just the right amount of, I guess, research, understanding what you're choosing, and then letting go enough to let the instinctual side kick up. So when I choose a planet first, this is the kind of list I would make. Venus first, for example, I would say, okay, we want to agree that Venus signifies these things. So from the Venus standpoint, this is what her viewpoint is, or where she focuses on from that unconscious place. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so the Venus function assumes that everything should feel right and or good. And you can think about changing that sentence for any other planet you would choose. It would be very different for Mars, for example. But in this place of choosing Venus first and assuming that everything should feel right or good, choosing Venus first is literally choosing to live through the feeling function. So you can see how different this would be for someone who is very Gemini oriented. I have South Node in Gemini in the third. So for me, this was in some ways shocking, because feeling primarily determines what makes sense, what I want, my underlying self-image, if I'm secure or not. And also importance of relationships is increased, because now on the rising, on the AC, Venus sits there, and Venus represents the other. So I think the next slide will be my chart, I'm hoping, so we can take a peek. Yeah, okay. So that's the natal. Let's go to the next one. It should be Venus on the first. And I think the next one, hopefully everyone can see it. It'll be kind of small, but it'd be great if we can just see both of them together. Yeah, so let's look at it that way. And without spending a lot of time, you can see that Venus on the first, for me, moves a lot of things into the first house. And for me, what that has done is it's brought a lot of my Saturn-Mercury conjunction that has a lot of harsh, tight, lots of stomach issues, lots of over-processing information in kind of a tight, controlling way. You know, Mercury is that ruler of my south node. Bringing it into the first house has actually brought it much more present into my physicality and my beingness. So that's just one example of how that has made a shift for me. So let's go one more slide. Yeah, so here's an example. I chose to live Venus first, and this is a list of some things that then I chose or moved forward with. I quit a 22-year career in healthcare compliance, which was pretty crazy. And I pulled out a bunch of my retirement to live off of. I just didn't want to do that anymore. And this really, to me, speaks to Venus, because Venus has a lot to do with what we really want and what we really need and what makes us feel good. You know, I got online for the first time, online dating. That was new for me. I put on a chunk of weight, which was healthy for me, but I wasn't expecting it to happen. And it then required me, you know, a lot of my clothes were uncomfortable, and it required a big transition around that. My hormones changed a lot. I sold pretty much everything. Then I moved to New York to be with my boyfriend, who I had met after that time. So my choosing Venus first, a lot of things manifested in my life to support that, or to show me what my life would be like when I lived from that place. And that's when I started to get super excited about it. So my talk at last NORWAC was on planets on the first, because I feel like in many ways, you know, our birth chart is what it is, but we do have choices. We have choices to move around with the material that's there or within ourselves. So let's talk about Olive now. And Olive, are you on the line too?
Hey, I'm here now.
Okay, good. Because I wanted to
I think I was here. So Linda had to unmute me.
Yeah, because I want to talk about this together. I don't have a prescription for you. I feel like it's an interactive type of thing. So we're looking at, and I know you're interested in playing around with either Venus or Saturn. And
I'm starting to lean more towards Saturn, but I don't know. Maybe I can play with both of them.
Yeah.
With all my jump, maybe I can switch it up a little bit.
Well, I thought about a couple of things, and when I look at your chart, I mean, I'm looking at the classic EA signature. So we have Pluto in the fourth. We know the polarity is the 10th, which would support a Saturn. Saturn is conjunct the North Node, which shows, you know, that's like who you link arms with through your path of Dharma. And it's interesting too, though, that your South Node is ruled by Venus, but Venus is in that 12th house. And so there could be a lot said for choosing Venus first, because experiencing Venus on the first would be a lot different than experiencing Venus in the 12th. You know,
Right.
So I think it would be completely up to you. Saturn, you know, if you were my client and I was, it's hard because we haven't had a long conversation up into this, but just looking at the chart, it seems like Saturn has just a big punch in a lot of directions.
Yeah, and I'm thinking Saturn just because my lesson, really, like my whole life has kind of been that Capricorn, you know, Saturn kind of like, you know, kind of adult responsibility, self-responsibility, and obviously in Aries, like having, like, you know, taking the initiative to do that, right? To kind of adult up, which I really have no desire to do, but I must. And so I've always had a lot of Capricorns, and if they're not, and I'm talking like elementary school Capricorns, and if they're not Capricorn, they have really strong 10th house. So I kind of like the way my chart looks more with Venus. but I'm thinking I might want to try out Saturn.
So let's go to the next slide, Linda. Let's look at the next one. I think it will be Venus first.
Yeah.
And I might have you skip one more to the double chart if it's easy to see the two, because I like seeing them side by side.
I'm here on the double chart.
Okay. Yeah. So let's look at this. So if we were to choose Venus first, if you were to choose Venus first, you kind of get an idea of where things move to. One thing I liked about it is, your North Node in Aries is ruled by Mars. So Mars does move into the first house if you choose Venus first. So that does give you some more access to Mars, which is, to me, feels like something in a direction that that you chose.
Yeah, I really need more cardinal kind of energy. So I kind of like that cluster of the planets kind of in the first house. I'm needing like a little more of that meism, I think, and just some of the cardinal kind of drive or energy. And I like the way my Pluto shifts into the fifth instead of it being into the fourth. And I like how my moon conjuncts the midheaven. So I like the Venus on first. I just think I need a little more Saturn too, and I certainly don't need to gain 15 pounds. So
well, and I just want to say, because it was funny, there was that maybe just be particular to me. I just think it's an example of Venus. One thing is not included today because we don't have enough time, but in my slides for NORWAC, which are on my website if anyone wants to look at them, I did talk a lot about astrophysiognomy, and Judith Hill does great work around that, body types based on astrology signatures. And I think that when we choose something first, that there's a part of us that tries to, because I think our body's reflecting our thoughts and our feelings. So for me, when I came into a more Venusian space, I think whatever was available in my genetic makeup, like it just came out. But what's available to us is, all different. I mean, just because in mine there was room for 15 more pounds doesn't mean that that's what would happen for you and yours. I just think.
No. But I mean, come on, because we go way back. I think that I don't know. I mean, is there a way to kind of? And I'm worried about my 6 grand cross not being able to kind of consciously choose. But I really, actually, the last week, really been kind of trying to put it together or kind of live it, like you say,
Yeah.
So I've actually been really eager to kind of choose one or the other, but I'm thinking, what do you think? Saturn for me, you think? I think because Capricorn midheaven with the Saturn too, so that's kind of the same thing as.
Yeah, Linda, let's go to the double chart that has the Saturn. It's probably 2 more.
I just want to hear what you say, Tara, because I'm, I'm what you think is best, and then I'll try to live it.
Yeah. So I can't. Our faces are like right over the. Let me try. There we go. Perfect. Yeah. So what I like about Saturn first, again, because the natal chart has so many signatures for Saturn and Capricorn wanting to become more incorporated, I like choosing Saturn first. I also like it because it offers you a chance to really take responsibility and take charge of yourself. We've talked about that before.
I do have to do that. And so I do think, I'm going to choose Saturn. I'm making the conscious choice to choose to live Saturn.
Yeah, and the thing about Saturn is Saturn doesn't just want to talk about it, and you have so much Gemini going on. It can so oftentimes feel, and I know this from my own personal experience, we can feel like we're really getting somewhere because we've understood it or we're figuring it out or we've talked it out. And Saturn kind of calls BS on that and says, hey, what are you actually building or making with it? And so choosing Saturn truly, if you're committed to it, can, like, maybe more than any of the other planets, I mean, it's about the reality plane. So you ought to be able to see in a concrete way, even if it starts out small, things shifting, which I think could be very exciting for you. Like, it wouldn't be up in your head or out in a sea of possibilities. It would be bringing it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to for sure stick with Saturn. And that's what I initially told you I wanted to do anyway. It's just, to me, I really need that kind of structure and kind of, I need that cardinal drive. I know you said that you kind of incorporate your natural rising sign, but I'm more inclined to try to embrace that Aries rising with Saturn there, Yeah. And the nodes on the angle. So can I do that? Do you recommend that?
You can do whatever you want. I would take what feels right to you.
Yeah, I want to take that Aries, and I want to, learn how to kind of be more driven and have more energy to do things, to
Well,
function.
and something else that I like, you have your sun conjunct Venus and Mars, but the conjunction with Venus is balsamic and the conjunction with Mars is new. And so to me,
Right.
that speaks to, right, that Venus sun is like an older cycle of you, and then we have that Mars being a newer one. And what I like about this Saturn on the 1st, if you look at it, it separates them. Do you see how Venus sits in the 1st house, but actually your sun and Mars come together in the 2nd house? So I like them having a little bit of delineation, and I like that they're in the 2nd house because that's embodiment. So that
and it's also resources and survival and all that kind of Taurus theme. And really my lesson is kind of, I'm very Taurus in loyalty and dependability and all these kind of really, I'm very Taurine in nature, but at the same time, much of my lesson, I kind of bounce to that Scorpio Earth, and, and much of my lesson this lifetime is actually to kind of learn those Taurus lessons, right? Like resources and, kind of surviving on my own and, kind of that stuff. So I kind of like that it also places emphasis on that Taurus kind of 2nd house theme,
Yep. Yeah, because in your natal chart, they sit in the 12th. So you have that energy, but 12th house is never as accessible. It's hard to materialize 12th house. So I like that we take those pieces that are really incorporated with your destined identity and dharma and all your soul's intention, and it pulls it into a place of really living it. Now, understand, but understand but if you choose it too, and I don't, planets first is not for the faint of heart. It really is like, it really is willing. It's not something outside of you, but it is a little bit scary.
Right.
Choosing a whole different standpoint within yourself. There have been times for me during this last year and a couple months where it's been so uncomfortable. I mean, I could barely stay in my own skin.
Right.
And I so much want to go to my head instead of in my feeling, like it feels awful. So like just because,
I think given my theme right now, just my overall, like with Pluto square, my nodal axis, which I haven't even had my first hit yet. And all these kind of like, my transits are so straightforward right now. They're just like, they couldn't be more straightforward. And it really is kind of, time that I, need to kind of do the work, right? So I think I'm for sure going to go with Saturn, and I realize that could be uncomfortable. I also like how my nodes kind of fall on the angles, so living kind of my north node or whatever, being right there conjunct the ascendant. I do think I want to choose to get away from my Gemini ascendant, and certainly I didn't want to choose Mercury because it's already there.
Yeah.
So I'm over the Gemini energy. I'd like to stick that in the 2nd house and try to use obviously I'll always be my chart, obviously. And hopefully my 6th grand cross won't, make me so rigid that I can't apply this, but I'm excited to try to, for sure.
Well, I think also, it's been life-changing for me. I'm excited for other people to do it that I'm close to so we can share those experiences. But I think a couple things. So Saturn first, if you really kind of get into that space of what would those questions be, or what does a Saturn filter look like, it's going to slow you down. So with all that mutability, and because with the mutability with that Mars and Mercury and that Gemini in the 12th house, it's a lot of mutability right all over the place. When we take that energy, that Mars and that Mercury, and stick it in the 2nd house, it's going to slow it down some. And I think for you, just slowing yourself, just choosing to slow down will give you access to more.
Right.
So I think that it may be frustrating at times because part of the escape from some of the things that are not so comfortable in our lives come from those natural avenues.
Right.
So just to be aware of that, like when your Gemini is firing off all crazy, what is underlying Saturn asking all the time? Is it useful? I mean, like, can we apply it to something? Is it actually building something? Is the foundation strong? Is there a foundation at all? Think about Saturn as a house, which is kind of funny considering our recent personal conversations. It's are we taking responsibility for, what we own, and are we making best use of it that we can, and then setting goals and all these things. So choosing Saturn first will slow you down, but I think that would be perfect.
Yeah, and I agree. too.
And moon is in the 10th house.
Right.
So it gives you more. It's like this. I think for you, you're right. Some things are very straightforward, and this one just it moves.
Yeah, and I like how Capricorn is actually on the midheaven too, so it gives me a Capricorn haven.
And look what it does again. Your natal moon is an immutable house, right?
Right.
So again, this choice moves it into a cardinal house, but it's also an earth house, and so I think this earthiness is going to give you something to root into. And I think that,
yeah, I mean, I'm pretty earth, like my chart is pretty earth already, and I guess one of the reasons why I'm definitely thinking for sure now I'll be choosing Saturn is because I kind of already live my Venus, like Venus is really central to my chart, and my 12th house, I'm actually really kind of, I access my 12th house a lot, like I really have since childhood. So, and also because I think also my planets aren't very, they're wide in conjunction. It's not technically a stellium, 2 different signs, and all of them are pretty wide in orb. So I think that I'm going to really try this Saturn. I think it's important, just given what I'm doing now and what I have to do, like the work I have to do, regardless of how uncomfortable it might be. I need to get it. Like it's a time to roll up my sleeves and actually become an adult. Essentially, I have to do that. So, and I have no clue how to do it, but maybe I can implement Saturn on the 1st and give it a try for sure, because, and it's all about resources right now for me anyway. And, like my essential needs being met, all this kind of stuff. So I like that I get planets in the 2nd house. I like that a transit chart would put Pluto in my 10th or 9th. So like I want it out of the 8th. And so I'm really excited to try to do this, for a little bit. Of course, I'll report back to you how it's working.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm hoping so fixed, like so fixed Grand Cross. And I'm just like, I'm kind of fatalistic that way. And I'm just like, oh, woe is me. So I'm hoping that I can really apply it,
Yeah, I mean, and it's always your choice. And if you don't apply it all the time, it's fine. I mean, that's the thing. It doesn't have to be every second of every day. But
right. I have been ever since we've been talking about it, I have been really trying to bring it to my conscious awareness and thinking about it quite a bit. Like it pops into my head a few times a day, like, oh yeah, I'm putting Saturn on the 1st. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I'm definitely trying to I'm trying to apply it. Really, I'm trying to consciously live it.
Yeah, and when I think about that, one thing that helps me, in addition to thinking I'm putting it on the 1st, I imagine inside myself, almost just stepping a little bit to the right or left or wherever Saturn feels like in you. Like maybe you can even feel a part in your body where the things around Saturn feel more I don't know, I can do that sometimes, feel like, well, where do I think Mercury might be? I can feel that in my nervous system, and I'm used to that juice, right? So maybe Saturn sits down in my, I don't know, in my bones, deep in my bones somewhere. But if you can kind of access and feel that it's really just you shifting in you, that's helped me. It's helped me because you're not missing something, you're just accessing something in a new way. And when we access it in a new way, what's awesome is all these other planets being in different houses, which I think of as classrooms or areas where we experience life, that's where we get to experience all of them differently. So yeah, great for you. You can experience Pluto in the 5th instead of the 4th. That's exciting.
Right. Yeah, and I really like that as well. I like how your chart shows Pluto and Uranus in your 4th now, so it's essentially kind of living.
Yeah, but it's not very comfortable. That part's actually I'm funny. At first I thought, oh, Venus, I went around being, is it yummy or is it icky? All excited about it. And I remember telling Adam in one of my sessions, I was like, choosing Venus first doesn't necessarily mean everything feels good. It means you feel everything more, including the things that don't feel good, and he just cracked up laughing because that's the nature of feeling, right? So it's the same thing when you choose, the function of Saturn. Some of the things will feel good, like, wow, I'm accomplishing things, and other things will feel, not so much, but it gives you so much more space in yourself.
Yeah, I like it. I'm going to try it for sure. I'm really excited to try it because Lord knows I need something. I need a change for sure. Yeah. So I want to get out of that whole craziness of my natal chart and at least really try to live it,
Yep. And even think about like, how would Saturn, how would your version of Saturn, how would Saturn walk? How would Saturn sit? How would Saturn eat? Right? How would Saturn, because really like I've played with all these different pieces. When does Saturn like to go to bed? When does Saturn like to get up? Does Saturn like to talk on the phone with people? Does Saturn, what kind of conversation does my version of Saturn like? You can play around with it. Make it, I guess I would encourage everyone to make it, it's a serious choice, but make it a little bit more like a game, because it doesn't have to be, I think, like if we access that side of ourselves, let's just explore and experiment with, wow, what is this part of me like? And then just kind of riding it out, that gives us more access as well. It's like children playing versus trying to be an adult enforcing rules around something. Like, you don't really know what your Saturn coat feels like until you start wearing it.
Right. And I've never really, I mean, I definitely know what Saturn feels like. I mean, but at the same time, I really need to, kind of access that, my Saturnian side way more than I ever have. So
yeah, and then you can just in perfect Saturn fashion, you build it your way, right? It's your Saturn.
Right. Yeah, and I like that it's in Aries. I need a little bit more meism. I'm always like everyone else. So like I liked, I'm very 12th house into where everything is like self-sabotage and, self-undoing and giving everything away, so I really, I need to kind of have those Saturnian lessons, to kind of
so if
work. And
if 12th is self-undoing, Saturn in the first draw, the first is what? Self-building up. It's self-building, self-structuring, self-supporting. It's perfect.
Right. Yeah. And then how it falls in the second house, I like too, that my planets go kind of in the second,
And I know I told you this, but it keeps standing out for me. It means you can truly embody them. Like, truly embody them, like live and breathe those planets, because all that. You have tons of information, you have good access to it, but to truly embody it it's different.
Yeah. Yeah, I like, hopefully, that my Gemini will also be like, in a dirt house, like dirt.
That's perfect.
Just because